Chapter 13. Gertrude's eyes fluttered open to the familiar yet disconcerting sight of the dense woods, the canopy dappling her face with specks of early morning light. She sat up briskly, her heart pounding in the sudden silence that had replaced the echoes of her elder self's warnings. The older woman, a version of Gertrude herself, but seasoned by years and battles unknown, was gone as if she were merely a wisp of dream smoke. She scanned her surroundings. The underbrush appeared undisturbed except for one detail. A path cleaved through the foliage. The earth turned anew. By her side lay her kedia, its spiked ball tethered to a sturdy handle by a gleaming chain, alongside her shield, emblazoned with the crest of Salvonia. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the kedia, a silent promise of protection and power. A voice within urged her to call her sergeant, to report this anomaly and request backup, yet curiosity twined with a burgeoning thrill coaxed her to rise alone. The path beckoned her towards Lake Clovis, and Gertrude, driven by a compulsion she couldn't quite name, followed it, leaving thoughts of assistance behind like shed leaves. With each step, the forest seemed to both hush and amplify her presence, her boots crunching softly on the broken twigs that littered the beaten earth. Her breaths grew deeper, more deliberate, as the lake's proximity sent ripples of adrenaline coursing through her veins. There was fear there, certainly, a primal, instinctual alertness. But it was entwined with something else, something raw and exhilarating. This was not the cushioned corridors of her castle, nor the scripted drills of the courtyard. This was the wild, where any shadow could conceal a foe, any rustle could herald an attack. Danger was a palpable entity here, and it set her blood aflame. She clutched the kedia closer, feeling the weight and balance of Lyril in her grip, a silent vow to defend herself with its deadly dance if need be. As Gertrude emerged from the wooded vale, the expanse of Lake Clovis unfolded before her, its surface a mirror to the sky's awakening blush. No reflection could hide the truth of her heart, though. Here on the precipice of the unknown, Gertrude found a vibrant, terrifying freedom. For the first time she was truly alone, unshielded by royalty or expectation, standing on the cusp of life and death. And she relished it. Gertrude's eyes narrowed as she took in the gruesome tableau before her. Two bodies, each clad in the unmistakable attire of Laurone soldiers, lay entwined in the throes of mutual destruction. The irony was not lost on her. Brothers-in-arms turned mortal enemies by some unseen strife. One soldier sprawled backward, a sword jutting from his belly, his lifeblood seeping into the earth. Beside him, the other's head rested, severed from a neck that now served as a morbid pedestal. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the musk of decay, invading her nostrils, and Gertrude fought the bile rising in her throat. She had imagined battles, choreographed them in her mind, but the reality was far more visceral, more putrid than any training ground could replicate. Flies buzzed in a frenzied dance of death, and the writhing lullaby of maggots played beneath the skin of the fallen. A simple grave marked with the sacred circle of Kenru caught her eye. It was a small mercy amidst the carnage, a testament to a respect that transcended mortal conflict. Someone had cared for the soul that now rested beneath the soil, despite the surrounding desolation. "Who lies here, honored by friend or foe?" she whispered to herself, tracing the wooden emblem with a fingertip. "Step away from there," a voice commanded, shattering the quiet reverence. Gertrude spun around, Lyrule instinctively tightening in her grasp. Two Laurone soldiers emerged from the tree line, their dark brown and green leather armor blending with the foliage, a stark contrast to the bright white tabards emblazoned with the crest of their homeland. Mail armor glinted beneath the morning sun, hinting at preparedness for battle even amidst the tranquility of Lake Clovis. "Explain yourself. Did you do this?" one soldier demanded, pointing to the slain men. "I did not," Gertrude said firmly, her gaze steely as she assessed the new threat. "These men have been dead for days. See how the wounds have blackened and nature has claimed them?" Her logic was sound, but suspicion lingered in their eyes like a stubborn fog. They circled her, as if expecting deceit to sprout from her lips. "Look upon my weapon. It bears no blood, and it is not a blade," she continued, hoisting Lyril for emphasis. "One man has been decapitated, clearly not by the likes of this." "Perhaps," the second soldier mused, squinting at her as if trying to place a half-forgotten memory. "But aren't you the one? Which one would that be?" Gertrude bristled slightly, feeling the weight of her shield against her back, a silent ally in case words failed to dissuade them. "The one we've been told to find," he replied, something akin to recognition dawning in his expression. "Lady Gertrude of Salvonia. Yes?" Without hesitation, Gertrude's hand shot to her helmet, securing it upon her head with a swift, practiced motion. Her other arm swept behind, grasping the familiar contours of her shield, and bringing it to bear just as one of the soldiers lunged forward in an attempt to seize her. The edge of her shield met his advance with a solid thud, sending him staggering backward. "Stand down, Lady Gertrude! We mean you no harm!" the first soldier called out, but his companion was already on the move, sword drawn and gleaming with a menacing light. Gertrude's lips curved into a wry smile beneath her helm. "Your actions say otherwise," she retorted, her voice echoing slightly within the metal confines. With a fluid grace that belied the heft of her armor, she sidestepped the second soldier's thrust and swung Lyril, her Kedia, in a broad arc. The weapon's chain sang through the air, the spiked ball blurring as it gathered momentum. The soldiers, clad in their mail armor with white tabards marked by the crest of Laurone, were not prepared for the ferocity and skill with which Gertrude wielded her unconventional weapon. Their swords clanged against her superior Xelite armor, strikes that might have felled a lesser opponent. But Gertrude remained unyielding, a sentinel among the trees. Lyril, her spiked morning star, lashed out like a viper, its spikes grazing the tabard of one soldier, who barely managed to dodge the full force of the blow. Using her height to her advantage, Gertrude kept them at bay, her shield absorbing each desperate strike with a dull clang that resonated through the woods. "Yield!" she commanded after parrying another attack. "I do not wish your death." Frustration etched their faces, but neither man could penetrate her defense. With a whirl of Lyril, Gertrude struck, not with lethal intent, but enough to severely injure the left leg of one of the men. Armor is weakest at the joints, as you know. I would have expected a soldier of Laurone to be aware of this. The man fell to the ground in pain. No doubt the bone beneath his inferior leather-armored leg had been fractured by the spiked ball of the Kedia she wielded. "You're fortunate that we need you in one piece, woman." The second man remained in a fighting stance and stepped in front of his fallen comrade. "Last chance to come quietly, before I'm forced to disarm you and drag you back to our ship by force." "By force, you say?" Gertrude tried her best to hold back her laughter. "I'm begging the gods that you'll try. Men never want to kill me. They always want something else from women, isn't that right, scoundrel? You'll have to kill me before I give myself freely." Gertrude stood in place and bent her knees to a steady position. The man was slightly larger than her, but she had practiced enough times with Heppelton to understand much about forward inertia of a charging foe. She knows that she can't absorb his charge. However, a heavier opponent charging at her often leaves his backside very vulnerable, since all focus is to his front. Unlike a sword or spear, the Kedia's whirl could easily strike a moving opponent from behind to incapacitate or even kill. As anticipated, the Laurone soldier charged forward with his sword raised. She waited until he began to arc his sword downward while still moving forward. Timing was essential. She whirled Lyril around twice and allowed the third swing to circle and strike her opponent on the back of the head with tremendous force. He fell to the ground unconscious. She looked over at the first man who was trying to stand on his 2 feet despite his injury. "Clearly you two are new at this," she added. "Care to tell me what Laurone soldiers are doing this far west of Brenwell? I hope you're not just looking for me." The man shook his head and assumed a fighting stance. In a few moments, You'll be the ones answering our questions, Lady Gertrude. The rustling of leaves heralded new arrivals. 5 more soldiers emerged from the undergrowth, their expressions a mix of amusement and disbelief as they surveyed their 2 comrades bested by a solitary figure. Quite the spectacle, Lady Gertrude of Salvonia, the tallest among them spoke, stepping forward with a courteous nod. He was Sergeant Sorkdonis, his tone conveying a respect that clashed with the mockery of the others. "Would you do us the honor of accompanying us? There is no need for further conflict," he said. "An honor I must decline," Gertrude replied, standing tall amidst the encroaching circle of men. "I would face death before chains." "Your bravery is admirable," Sorkdonis said, his gaze never wavering. "But we assure you, no harm will come to you in Scorlane. Lord Yakvon himself has expressed a desire for your audience." "Then tell Lord Yakvon," Gertrude declared, her grip tightening on Laurel, "that Lady Gertrude does not bow to the whims of those who send soldiers to fetch her like some stray dog. I am my own woman, bound by no man's decree." Her eyes burned with defiance, the will to fight, for her freedom, for her life, flaring as fiercely as ever. Her stance was resolute, her breath steady as the morning dew clung to her armor. Her fingers clasped around Laurel, the kedia that had become an extension of her will. As one of the soldiers stepped closer, she began to swing the weapon in wide, fluid circles. The chain sang through the air, a testament to its light weight and lethal grace. Laurel was designed for speed, for quick strikes to an enemy's vulnerabilities, and Gertrude wielded it with a precision born of relentless days spent in the training room under Heppelton's critical eye. "Stand down, lady," one soldier warned, but his words were wind against stone. A cold knot of fear uncoiled in her stomach, not of death, but of defeat and capture. To call for help would shatter the image of strength she had fought so hard to forge, reverting her to the helpless de facto princess her family believed her to be. With a defiant glare, she issued her challenge. "Tum fac pessimum, para tu sum ad Kenru si tu es congredi." "Do your worst. I am ready to meet Kenru if you are eager to fight." At that moment, a figure emerged from the forest shadows, disrupting the tense tableau. Dressed in simple garb, he carried the easy demeanor of a man of the water, not the sword. A fishing net draped over one shoulder, a rod in hand, and a cart laden with supplies marked him as no soldier. His beard was a thick brush of untamed dark hair, framing a face with eyes as deep and brown as fertile earth. "Perhaps it would be wise for you gentlemen to take your leave," the stranger suggested, his tone even but carrying the weight of an unspoken threat. "We have our orders to take Lady Gertrude back alive," retorted Sorkdonis, "and we do not wish to harm a non-combatant." "Then it is you who should depart," the fisherman replied firmly, planting his feet with a stubborn resolve. Gertrude seized the moment of distraction, backing away from the encircling soldiers. She held Laurel at the ready, prepared to defend her life against any who dared approach. Her heart pounded a fierce rhythm, yet she found solace in the certainty that she would not yield to fear or to fate. This was her battle to fight, and hers alone. Gertrude's grip tightened around Laurel as she watched the stranger step confidently between the armed men. The morning light filtering through the trees glinted off her weapon's spiked ball, which seemed to hum with latent energy in the charged silence. "Ever been to Laurone?" Sorkdonis asked, something akin to recognition flickering across his features. "Indeed," replied the stranger, a wry smile playing on his lips. "It's where I call home." "My lord?" Sorkdonis's voice held a note of incredulous surprise as he stepped forward, scrutinizing the fisherman's ordinary visage. But then the stranger met his gaze, and a slow smile unfurled across his bearded face. Something shifted in the air as the stranger locked eyes with each of the soldiers in turn. Gertrude observed, rooted in place, as a collective dizziness seemed to sweep over the men, their postures slackening. A ripple of unease followed, visible in their shifting stances and the way their hands hovered uncertainly over their sword hilts. "Does anyone else feel," one soldier began, trailing off as he swayed slightly on his feet. "Your armor reeks like a week-old carcass," another blurted out, grimacing as he edged away from his comrade. "Quiet, both of you," a third snapped, his eyes darting about nervously. "And who took those coins from last night's game, eh? Don't think I didn't notice they were missing." "Enough!" Sorkdonis barked, but his voice lacked its earlier command. The authority that had cloaked him seemed to unravel at the edges. "Petty thieves and whiners, all of you," muttered a fourth, scratching at his mail as if it suddenly irritated his skin. "Seems like the sturdy chainmail of Laurone hides more than just flesh," the stranger said, his tone laced with bemusement. "It's pretty clear who the weaklings in this group are." Gertrude felt a surge of wonder as she watched the once intimidating squad devolve into squabbling. The stranger, with nothing more than a steady gaze, had sown discord among them, turning warriors into children bickering over trivialities. She remained vigilant, however, aware that the tide of battle could shift as quickly as the winds upon Lake Clovis. The discord sown by the stranger's gaze had taken root, and now the Laurone soldiers' brotherhood unraveled like a tapestry torn apart by steel claws. In a macabre dance of fury and confusion, they clashed, their swords no longer held with discipline, but wielded in frenzied desperation. The once orderly sounds of combat devolved into chaos. The clanging of metal on metal was interspersed with animalistic grunts and curses. One soldier's blade found its mark, sliding deep between the rings of his comrade's mail, eliciting a wet cough as blood bubbled from the man's lips before he crumpled to the earth. Another, eyes wide with madness, swung recklessly and severed the arm of the nearest figure, who screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over an exposed root. His scream was abruptly silenced as a third soldier drove a sword through his throat, an expression of grim satisfaction fleeting across his face before it contorted in agony. Another blade had pierced his back, pushed with such force that the tip emerged through his chest. They fell one by one, each moment more ghastly than the last, until only Sorkdonis remained, panting heavily, his armor dented and slick with the crimson lifeblood of his own men. He was a lone, wounded bear, surrounded by the carnage of his former allies, his eyes burning with a mix of pain and disbelief. Gertrude, her heart pounding with terror and adrenaline, seized the opportunity presented by the self-inflicted massacre and fled. The rawness of the violence, the scent of fresh spilled blood, and the grotesque tableau of dismemberment were etched into her mind's eye, igniting a primitive fear she hadn't known before. But her flight was short-lived as Sorkdonis, driven by some unfathomable instinct or duty, pursued her. She heard his ragged breaths closing in before his bulk crashed into her, sending them both tumbling to the ground. Her training surged within her, guiding her movements. With Lyrel's chain wrapped around her fist, she hammered a blow to his kneecap, the sound of crunching bone echoing through the clearing. As he howled, Gertrude grasped her dagger and drove it into the soft flesh of his wound, twisting hard. Sorkdonis' scream turned into a guttural roar as he tried to push her off, but Gertrude bit down on his chin, tasting the iron tang of his blood. With manic strength, she wrenched off his helmet and grabbed the ball of Lyrel, transforming it into a deathly hammer. Over and over, she brought it down upon his head, each impact a splash of red, each crunch a testament to her will to survive. His struggles weakened, then ceased altogether, but Gertrude could not stop. The primal part of her mind had taken control, urging her to ensure the threat would never rise again. Finally, the red mist of survival receded, and Gertrude's arms slowed, trembling with exhaustion and horror. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stared down at what remained of Sorkdonis' shattered visage, her hands and armor caked with viscera. It was then that she lifted her gaze, her senses returning to the present, and saw the stranger standing there, silent and still, having witnessed the entirety of her gruesome struggle. Gertrude's chest heaved, her breath forming misty clouds in the cool air as she stumbled away from the grotesque tableau of death. The metallic scent of blood clung to her senses, a pungent reminder of the brutality she had just unleashed upon Sorkdonis. Her kedia, Lirul, slipped from her grasp, thudding softly onto the mossy forest floor, It was then that the stranger emerged from the shadows of the trees, his approach silent and measured. "Why did you run?" he asked, his voice calm, almost soothing against the backdrop of chaos. "You're clearly no novice in combat." And Gertrude's eyes flickered with the remnants of adrenaline. "I saw an opening," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "They turned on each other, consumed by their own rage. I didn't know if I could defeat them all, so I took the chance to escape." "Ah, but savagery is a simple thing to summon when death looms over us," he remarked, studying her with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the battle haze still clouding her mind. "There's a sliver of darkness in everyone, even women. You embraced it at the precise moment needed." Her gaze dropped to her hands, stained with the lifeblood of another. A shudder ran through her, but she forced herself to meet his eyes again. "Darkness," she repeated, the word tasting bitter. He nodded, a trace of sorrow crossing his features. "Yes, my daughter too nearly succumbed to such darkness. She was a warrior not unlike yourself, fell in battle not long after her mother was slain by a brute during Laurone's darkest hour." He spoke as if recalling a distant memory, one that brought both pride and pain. "Running only postponed the inevitable," he continued, gesturing at the mayhem around them. "Yet I believed you would prevail." He extended a hand toward her. "Come, let me help you up." Reluctantly, Gertrude placed her bloodied hand in his, allowing him to pull her to her feet. The world seemed to steady slightly as she stood, though the weight of what she'd done, what she might yet have to do, pressed heavily upon her shoulders. "Call me Oliver," he said with an incline of his head. "Thank you, Oliver," she managed to reply, her voice a whisper lost amidst the sighs of the forest.